Does the Qur'an allow men to beat their wives? According to a survey I did recently, there are many people, men and women, who believe that men are permitted to hit their wives according to the Qur'an. So let's study what the Qur'an actually says so we can understand the proper commandments of God. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Munib Ali. Welcome to another video on the Qur'an study channel. So I recently did a survey on YouTube and TikTok asking the question whether people believe if God permits men to hit their wives. And here are the results. So I got a total of 1,744 responses. Now, being a mathematician, I can tell you that this number, 1,744, is by no means representative of any selective population. But the results were still interesting. The results told me that whilst most people believe this is not true, that men are not permitted to hit their wives, there were still 113 people, 6.5% of those who responded, who believe that God does permit men to hit their wives. And there were a very small number of people, 6, who are not sure. So although you might say there's a very small number of people who believe it is okay for men to hit their wives, it can still be a significant number, and we need to be clear about what the Qur'an says about this. Because a lot of the people who replied yes to this survey actually believe that the Qur'an itself gives this permission. Now, before we get into this particular topic of today, let me tell you about some of the other topics which are coming up on the Qur'an study channel, because these really affect people and the perception of Islam so crucially. And so we need to know what the Qur'an says about these things. We need to know the truth. So today we'll be studying the answer to the question, can a man hit his wife? But I also want to study the Qur'an to answer these other questions. Are men superior to women? Because in many parts of the world, this is believed. Can women have a working career? Can women work, or should they stay at home? Can a man marry a 6-year-old girl? This is really important because many people believe that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, married Aisha when she was 6 years old. So we're going to study the Qur'an to see whether this was even possible. I want us to study the divorce procedures and women's rights because, again, I know of many situations when people have got this wrong and this has destroyed livelihoods and families. I want to study procedures for remarriage and this thing called halala, which I will define when we do the video, but it is one of the most demeaning and disgusting laws which have crept into Islam. And then I also want us to study whether women are prohibited from going outside when they are divorced or widowed, because a lot of people have this belief that women have a period after they are widowed or when they are divorced where they have to stay indoors and they cannot socialize or interact with people outside their homes. So we would take a look at all of these things. But today we are studying whether a man can hit his wife. Now, the verse in the Qur'an which causes this controversy is this. It's Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 34. And the part of this verse which is relevant for today's study is the part which is commonly translated as to those women on whose part you fear disloyalty and ill conduct, admonish them first is in brackets, note, next, again in brackets, refuse to share their beds, and last, beat them, in brackets, lightly. And it is the word wadribuhunna, which is translated commonly as beat them. This is what we are going to study today. Can the word wadribuhunna really mean beat them? Can God really be telling men to beat their wives? Before we start, I want us to understand some of the key principles that we have to take into account when studying the Qur'an. Now, some of these relate to our understanding of the Qur'an itself. We have to know when studying the Qur'an that number one, that the Qur'an is the criteria for right and wrong, the truth and falsehood. It is Al-Furqan. The Qur'an is the criteria, no person and no other literature. Secondly, that the Qur'an is fully detailed. It gives us the details for everything, and therefore we have to seek the detail of guidance and instructions within the Qur'an itself, not outside. Thirdly, that the Qur'an is the best tafsir, the best explanation of itself. It provides its own explanation. There's a fourth one, which is that the Qur'an is clear. It makes things distinct. It clarifies things. It does not form complexity. It's simple. And Allah tells us that the Qur'an contains no contradictions. Now, all of these are stated by God in the Qur'an itself. I'm not making these up. And I have given you the references from the Qur'an here on this sheet. So what I would like you to do is, in your own time, go back and look at these references. Please do not think, well, Munib has put this up on the Qur'an study channel, so it must be true. I really want you to go and have a look at these, just like I did. And the second part of this is, okay, other than understanding some particulars and characteristics of the Qur'an, God actually tells us about how to study the Qur'an. How amazing is that? God tells us that when we are studying the Qur'an, we should not rush to conclusions. We should take our time. We should study all the related verses which are about a particular topic that we are looking at. And once we have looked at and understood all those verses and the context of those verses, then we will see the answer. We will see the criteria. Allah is telling us this. Secondly, we must have a pure, clear mind. What God is telling us is that when we study the Qur'an, we should not carry with us any preconceived notions or ideas or conclusions. We should not think, well, this is what we have read somewhere else. Now let's see how the Qur'an verifies or validates this. We should not think this is what our forefathers told us or what our Imam has told us, and then try and understand the Qur'an in that context. When we are studying the Qur'an, we must wipe out all preconceived ideas. And once we do that, we start to see the truth. We start to see the simplicity of God's commandments. We start to see the principles of God's message. And it all starts to fit together like a beautiful jigsaw. And if we do not do that, if we bring preconceived ideas, and if we try and ratify those ideas through the Qur'an, we will never understand the Qur'an. Then when we do our translations, we're going to put things in brackets, like beat lightly. We're going to start putting lightly after beat because we're going to say, well, we have to somehow make this make sense and sensible, so let's try and add things in to make it work. No, Allah is telling us we have to wipe out all preconceived ideas if we truly want to understand the Qur'an and obtain the truth. God also tells us in the Qur'an that when studying the Qur'an, we have to evaluate and ponder. We have to use our minds. We have to understand what Allah is trying to tell us. We have to reflect. We have to understand the rationale behind a commandment and see if it's making sense to us. Because the Qur'an will never contradict itself. All of its messages come together in perfect harmony and give us the truth. And if we are looking at other people's understanding of the Qur'an and other notions and other ideas, we have to critically evaluate those ideas. But using the Qur'an as the touchstone, as the only truth, as the criteria for right and wrong, as the best explanation, the best tafsir. This is how we study the Qur'an. This is how I study the Qur'an, and this is how I'm encouraging our viewers to study the Qur'an. So now that we have got that clear, let's study this verse. So remember, this is the verse we're looking at, and we're looking at the common translation that's given to the word wadribuhunna, beat them, in brackets lightly. Now, wadribuhunna is made up of the root letters Dwad, Ra, Ba. And this particular root word actually has several different types of meanings. And so what we have to do is try and find the meaning which best fits the overarching principles which God is describing for us when it comes to this situation of a marriage. Now, there are several meanings. So one of the meanings of this root word is to strike and to hit. So let's not dismiss that potential translation completely right now, because there is a possible meaning of this, which is to strike and hit. But there are several other meanings. Duad ra ba also means to bring forth. And Allah has used this for this meaning in the Qur'an itself. It also means to propound a similitude or an example, to give an example, a parable about something. Again, God has used it for this purpose in the Qur'an. To make a journey, to travel. It also means to avoid and to shun something or someone. To leave, to forsake and to separate from, and to condemn. So you see, there are different possible meanings that we can take from this root word. Now, remember, we're not going to rush to any conclusions. We're going to look at other verses which talk about the institution of marriage to see whether daraba can really mean to beat, to hit. Okay? So, I hope you've all got your Qur'an in front of you, because we're going to be looking at studying some very important verses about the institution of marriage. So, first of all, let's look at Surah Ar-Rum, which is chapter 30, verse 21. And among his signs is this: He created for you mates from yourselves, so that you might find comfort in them. And he ordained between you love and kindness. In that are signs for those who reflect. So here, God is telling us that He created couples, He created mates for us, for the purpose of comfort, for the purpose of love and kindness. Let's keep that in mind, and let's have a look at another verse. Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 19. O you who believe, it is not lawful for you to force women into marrying or holding on to them in marriage against their will. You shall treat your wives in a fair, kind, honourable way. The word here in Arabic is bil ma'ruf, which means to be fair, kind and honourable. So you shall treat your wives in a fair, kind and honourable way. Even if you dislike them, it may happen that God has placed much good in what you have failed to realise. Shall we have a look at another verse? And we're going to bring some of these learnings back at the end, so don't worry if you haven't taken a note of this just now. Next, let's look at Surah Al-Baqarah, which is chapter 2, verse 231. And when you divorce women, so this is looking at the worst case scenario now where men and women are getting divorced. And when you divorce women and they have fulfilled their term, either retain them in a fair, kind, honourable way, that word ma'ruf again, fair, kind, honourable way, or release them in a fair, kind, honourable way. And do not keep them intending harm, to transgress. So just take a look at this. Allah is telling us that even when we have decided to go down the route of divorce, even in that situation, we have to treat the other half in a kind and honourable way and not to harm them. Can you see the picture forming? And I just want us to look at two other verses which are much wider than the application of the institution of marriage, but they're relevant to this as well. We've looked at these many times in our Quran study videos. Surah Al-Isra, chapter 17, verse 17. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have conferred dignity on the children of Adam. God is telling us that He has created every single human being with dignity. So who are we to take away that dignity from anybody, let alone a wife? Dignity for every single human being. And also Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 256. La ikraha fid din. La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in deen. There is no compulsion. If there is no compulsion, What right does that give anybody to inflict some form of violent act on somebody else? Let's ponder, let's think about that. I think you know where I'm going with this. So let's bring this together. So the key message is about how to treat a wife. By the way, this applies to the treatment of a husband too. So if you try and form that jigsaw puzzle, this relationship is about comfort. It's about love and kindness. It's about fair, kind and honourable treatment, even when divorcing. It's about no harm. It's about maintaining dignity of the person as a human being. It's about there being no compulsion. So if that is the case, could God really be telling men that if they fear ill conduct by their wife, that they should hit them, beat them? Does that make any sense? Let's ponder. This is now where we have to use our minds and think logically, put this together in the context of these other verses that we have looked at. Could the use of the word daraba in this case mean beating or hitting a wife? If you think about this without any preconceived ideas about what else you have heard or understood previously about Islam, I think it becomes very clear that this word cannot mean beat or hit. This has been mistranslated, misunderstood, and people have then started to put in brackets lightly to try and justify this mistranslated word. Now, there is one other angle to this which we should study and think about. You see, the background to this is that you have a man and a woman who agree to get married. And what happens when they agree to marry is that they sign a contract. It's a contract. And what we have to understand is that, like any contract, like a business contract even, there are break clauses to free yourself from the contract if it is not working. Like other contracts, the important thing is that you can break away from the contract in an orderly way. There is an order to this breakage of the contract, and we will get into this far more deeply when we start to study the divorce proceedings per the Qur'an. But this is a contract, and if this contract is being broken or torn up in an orderly way, none of the parties can have a right to abuse or to be violent against the other party. Can you imagine if you have a business contract and one party says, okay, look, we do not need this anymore? Will God give or anybody give a right to the other party to hit and inflict violence on the other party? We must ponder about these things. The same thing in the context of a marriage. There can be no right for one party to hit or beat the other party. So if we go back to this verse now, where the common translation is beat them lightly. I have a real issue, as you know, with this word in brackets, lightly. This is wrong. This is not what God is telling us. I think what God is telling us, and if you look at the various meanings that are possible of daraba, I think God is telling us that if this is happening, men should shun and separate from their wives. What God is telling us, that this is the beginning of the separation process in advance of a potential divorce proceeding. This makes much more sense. Now, there are also many other parts of this translation of this verse which may not be correct. I think I'm going to come back to some of those other elements when we start to discuss some of these other topics which I said we will be studying per the Qur'an. But today's question was specifically whether God permits men to hit women. And by studying the Qur'an, well, we can see that the answer is no. Now, I hope that made sense to you. Let me know in the comment section whether that made sense and whether you agree. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel to see these study sessions. Don't forget, we are putting up videos about the Qur'an every week. And we really value your comments. We very much value you sharing our materials with others as well. I hope today's session was useful. Until next week, Assalamu alaikum.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن